This episode is brought to you in part by Ariya Norinth. If you too would like to become a patron and vote on what content goes live each and every month, head to drunkonwriting.com. Now, on to the show. Welcome back to the ongoing Drunk on Writing Stephen King dissection series. Today we're talking about one of Stephen King's better known stories, The Dead Zone, which might sound familiar to you because of the long-running TV show adaptation of it, though it was originally adapted as a movie starring Christopher Walken. Yes! But because I want to go deep on the moral discussions that The Dead Zone brings up, today we're starting things off a little differently because we're starting things off with, that's right, tequila. Espolón Añejo tequila, to be exact. I don't know what that translates to, but it's tequila aged in bourbon barrels. And I primarily bought this because of the wicked label. It's got all these dead skeleton dudes on it. I thought that was perfect for The Dead Zone. And yes, I know dead skeletons is a bit of a, well, dumb thing to say. We'll just put it like that. But yeah, let's take a look at this tequila. Look at it. Look at how clear and clean looking that is. It's got a lovely apple juice-like color, if you want to put it that way. I'm gonna go safe and childish on that. Yes, I am. Oh my god, that's smooth. I could probably just sit here and drink straight for the rest of the night. You know, given the nature of what we're about to discuss, maybe I will, maybe I won't. I don't know. We'll see how I'm feeling. Like I said at the start, if you know The Dead Zone, it's probably because of the long-lived USA TV series starring Anthony Michael Hall, which ran from 2002 to 2007. As described on the back of the DVD box for that series, The Dead Zone is a unique psychological thriller that combines a rich mix of action, the paranormal, and a continuing quest for justice. That's a pretty accurate descriptor for the book and the movie as well, although it kind of doesn't include the sort of pseudo-romance, which is a bit more prevalent in the TV show, but, you know, let's build on there. So, the whole story revolves around one Johnny Smith, as he likes to go by, who develops these sort of powers after getting into a pretty brutal car accident and diving into a coma for a few years. These abilities are some sort of combination of psychometry, clairvoyance, clairsentience, precognition, and retrocognition. Not sure what those are? Well, me either, really. And I'm not going to dive down the rabbit hole of that. Don't worry. It would take way too long to describe and explain. But basically, Johnny can see moments. I don't know how better to describe it. He can see moments of what I feel are really strong emotion, whether it's in the present, the past, or even in the future. He can see something like his nurse's house catching on fire with her kid in it, or his doctor's long-thought-dead mother giving up her baby, or who will be president. Things like that. We'll touch on that last one a bit more in a couple minutes. Now, if all of that kind of seems a little familiar to you, that's because it is. Stephen King purposely evokes the powers of the Shine within this book. Now, if you remember the Shine, it's from the story The Shining, of course. My favorite nod to this whole thing was this Sunday nursery rhyme that Johnny evokes, that he brings up a few times throughout the book, and you'll recognize it, even though it puts a nice little spin on it. I'm gonna sing this one, so you might want to cover your ears a little bit. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, 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 let it shine. Side note, there's also a reference to Carrie in the book as well, which seems to be a novel in this universe, meaning it's a book in The Shining as well. Anyway, having that power, it sounds kind of awesome. That whole combination of things, it allows them to really scrape the floor with this Wheel of Fortune guy. And that's the whole first section of the book. It's the name of the pilot episode for the TV show. It's Wheel of Fortune. And the guy, he just obliterates it more than I could ever hope to do at any casino anywhere. But don't go trying to recreate this accident. One, he got hit in the head by falling on some ice as a kid, and then two, he got into this head-on collision with his car, with a car while he was in a taxi, Well, that was in the book, and then in the TV show, it was in his car. And I think in the movie, it was I think it was a taxi as well. Anyways, he gets in this horrible accident. He's in a coma for a while. His life goes to hell. Don't do that. You don't want to do that. It's not worth the powers, especially because Johnny, in the end, he kind of ends up dying because of this power. And not just because of what it allows him to do, but what those bumps did was kind of cause this lesion in his brain that eventually, at least in the book and the movie, turn into a form of cancer. I believe it's left a little open-ended, but that's the interpretation that I have. And that lesion, that area of the brain, is what is the titular dead zone. As Johnny's doctor, Sam Wyzak, explains in the book, a part of John Smith's brain has been damaged beyond repair. A very small part, but all parts of the brain may be vital. He calls this his dead zone, and there, apparently, a number of trace memories were stored. All of these wiped out memories seem to be part of a set, that of street, road, and highway designations. A subset of a larger overall set, that of where is it. This is a small but total aphasia which seems to include both language and visualization skills. Oddly, this definition of the dead zone does not carry over to either the movie or the TV show. In the film, we have it defined this way by Dr. Wyzak in this conversation between Johnny and Dr. Wyzak. I've been tutoring this boy named Stuart. In the vision, I saw him drown. But that's not the point. In the vision, something was missing. How do you mean? It was like a blank spot, a dead zone. First of all, tell me, did the boy, in fact, drown? His father wanted him to play hockey. I talked him out of it. The boy's alive. Ah, yes. Don't you see how clear it is? Not only can you see the future, I can change it. You can change it, exactly. Here, yes, John, that is your dead zone. The possibility of altering the outcome of your premonitions. It's fascinating. Let me make a note. Sorry for lapsing into a bit of walking there. It's probably going to happen again. But in the TV show, we have the slightly updated Dr. Tran defining it like this. What seems to be clear is that your brain has found a new way to work. It's taking a detour around the damage and tapping into a region of the brain that humans don't normally use to handle sensory perception. In anyone else, this part of the brain might be considered a dead zone. In your brain, the dead zone is suddenly very much alive. However it's defined, the powers are basically the same in all three versions. And what this allows Stephen King to do, what it allows the TV show creators to do, what it allows the movie creators to do is kind of explore the crackerjack detective without actually having a crackerjack detective. Johnny Smith is basically a modern-day Sherlock Holmes. Not only because he solves unsolvable crimes, knows things that no one else can, but also because he kind of has a very horrible love life. Now, that love life varies a bit depending on the version that you're talking about, but they all kind of follow one Sarah Bracknell, a fellow teacher of his, potential lover, actual lover in at least one version. I would say two of the versions. I guess all three of the versions they're actual lovers, though that love kind of varies a bit. And they were in a relationship pre-coma. The coma obviously kind of screws things up. No, step back for a second. They weren't in a relationship in the book or the movie. They went out on a single date. The date in which he wiped the floor with that Wheel of Fortune character. In the TV show, he is in a relationship with her. They are in a relationship. And they stay connected on the TV show because she ends up having his son, Johnny Jr. All right, that's not something that is in the book. It's not something that's in the movie, but it's a nice little adaptation for the TV show. But I think it's all kind of based on this one reconnection the two characters have in the book. And we get a very kind of cool quote here. Sinking into her was like sinking into an old dream that had never been quite forgotten. I just kind of like that. I just like the imagery there. And very soon after this, Johnny's dad, Herb, he's playing with Sarah's son, who Sarah's son in the book is another another character's son, but Herb is playing with the character, with the son, and Stephen King writes, he does understand. The he being the dad and the she coming up being Sarah. This afternoon, she and I consummated a marriage that never was, and tonight, he's playing with his grandson. But the relationship's, it's a little weird. It's a little hot, too, for sure. Don't get me wrong. It's that kind of long-term pining, that very, very much what if is explored here. But something that is really explored, because the relationship is really more of a side note in the book and in the movie and kind of in the TV show as well. What's the main exploration is something that Sir Arthur Conan Doyle never really did with Sherlock Holmes is, what if Sherlock Holmes guessed or knew who Professor Moriarty was before he was this arch nemesis, this arch villain? What if he could have stopped Moriarty before he did all of the things that he ended up doing? To take it a bit of a step further and actually bring it in line with the book, bring it in line with what Stephen King actually brought up here. If you knew who Adolf Hitler was, and if you could stop him before he became Adolf Hitler, if going back to like 1930 or so, maybe even before that, you could kill Adolf Hitler and save all of those people. If you knew that you could save all those people, would you do it? Would you? Let's talk about the book for a little bit before we get into all of that. Now, while maybe not as prolific and certainly nowhere near as well known as some of the other books that we've covered already in the series, The Dead Zone really reminds me a lot of The Shining. And no, not just because The Dead Zone builds on the powers that were established in The Shining. For one, The Dead Zone is very much a slow burn. There's not a whole lot, especially at the beginning, to really get your blood pumping. It's not a heavy thriller. It's not a fast-paced thriller in any way, shape, or form. And the adaptations, whilst following the same basic form, the same basic premise, they kind of take things in a bit of a different direction while following the same kind of course. You know, it's sort of how Kubrick adapted The Shining when he made it his own thing. So were the Dead Zone's adaptations. But certainly, neither of the Dead Zone's adaptations were anywhere near as great as a Kubrick film. But case in point on the Dead Zone being a slow burn. Johnny's accident happens around page 50 or so in the version I have, with him slipping into the coma about halfway through page 51. Being the protagonist, you'd expect him to wake up pretty quickly. I mean, that's kind of what you see, right? You see the protagonist, he goes into the coma and boom, wakes up, things have changed, that's how it goes. I mean, look at something like The Walking Dead. He's shot, falls into a coma, boom, 28 days later. Oh, 28 days later, same kind of thing. Here, Johnny doesn't wake up until about page 98. But like 40 some odd pages later. That's kind of insane. And this is the great thing about literature. It allows us to explore these quieter, softer moments. These moments that probably wouldn't make for very great television, wouldn't make for a great movie, but they allow us to get into a character's head. So while Johnny is in his coma, while he's lying in bed, we see the suffering of his parents. We see his mother's downfall. We see his father suffering. We see Sarah, at first come every day, pledging loyalty, saying, crying her eyes out, missing him. And we see her slowly taper off and move on and accept that this is the way of life now. We get to see that across some 40 odd pages, and it's great. But at the same time, it is a little weird, I have to say. Usually we get like the one or two kind of scenarios. One, as I've said, Walking Dead, 28 days later, go to sleep, you wake back up. Two, you're in the coma, we see everything that happens in real time. I'm thinking, days of our lives kind of thing. We get some of that here, but here it's all a bit kind of mundane. I mean, the kind of biggest thing that happens while Johnny is in his coma is, one, you know, Sarah gets in a relationship, has a kid. Yeah, okay, that's very personal. That's important to the storyline. But the biggest thing, Nixon's resignation. That's a huge moment in history. It happens while he's in his coma. And, you know, we'll touch again on that in a couple minutes because it's important to the overall theme of the book. But there's certainly no, you know, zombie apocalypse kind of scenario within the story. No life-shattering event happens while Johnny is in a coma. And that's good. That's fine. It's just a little weird from a novel standpoint, from a reading standpoint. Oh, and I brought up the mom. I brought up the mom for a second. I want to touch on that for a second because Stephen King seriously has some serious messed up mom issues. I mean, first, the mom in Carrie, then the mom in The Shining, then, I don't know, that overzealous kind of religious fury just kind of keeps coming up. We have it here. It's like this mom is just so overbearing. Oh, The Stand. The Stand, it was another character. It was a very, very similar character. I don't know if Stephen King's mom was actually like that or if he just knew someone like that. But you can see it now where it's this kind of stock character for Stephen King. He's appearing in each and every book. And it's horrible. It's a horrible character. And every single time I would like want to reach into the book and just kind of slap the person. I was like, what is wrong with you? Stop it. Stop it. Be cool. Be chill for a minute. You know, it just keeps coming up, as do the psychic abilities. He's, you know, at this point, Stephen King is starting to seem a little one-note. Now, just the Stephen King books themselves, you know, we're not talking about the Bachman books here, which are very different, but the Stephen King books themselves are very much following a pattern. And we'll talk more about that when we hit different seasons, because the idea of him being one-note really much plays a point to that whole book. But back to this book, back to The Dead Zone, knowing as a reader that Sarah has gotten married, we've seen this, has had a son, it makes Johnny's words, the very first words he says as he's coming out of the coma, that much more heartbreaking. He says, the whole wad on 19, one way or the other, my girl's sick. I also want to step back to this one little bit while Johnny was in the coma because I think, well, I just think this is exceptional writing. Darkness, fading, until all that was left seemed to be a giant red and black wheel revolving in such emptiness as there may be between the stars. Try your luck. First time fluky, second time lucky. Hey, hey, hey. The wheel revolved up and down, red and black, the marker ticking past the pins, and he strained to see if it was going to come up 00, house number, house spin. Everybody loses but the house. He strained to see, but the wheel was gone. There was only blackness, and that universal emptiness. Nugatory, good buddy, El Zicho, cold, limbo. Johnny Smith stayed there a long, long time. Ugh, I can't stand how good that is. And there are so many similar moments of brilliance scattered throughout this book, like when Johnny's dad just casually sort of slips into the past tense when talking about Johnny's relationship with Sarah, or when she describes Johnny as part of another season now, and she could feel him beginning to slip away from her. And this incredibly detailed and just insane rant about Christmas ornaments that I feel King had just desperately been wanting to write, and he just kind of found a reason to stick it in here. But, you know, I'm going to write out, I'm going to copy here, and I'm going to say it out loud. The very first sentence of this section, and it's a long one, so it's enough. You'll get what I mean. The same chipped angels year after year, and the same tinsel star on top. The tough surviving platoon of what had once been an entire battalion of glass balls. And we'd never forget the honored dead, he thought. This one died as a result of a baby's clutching hand. This one slipped as Dad was putting it on and crashed to the floor. The red one with the Star of Bethlehem painted on it was simply and mysteriously broken one year when we took them down from the attic, and I cried. The tree stand itself. It goes on like that for like another page or so, but it's all great. As is the Jekyll and Hyde allegory that is scattered throughout the book that really permeates the entire narrative. All starting off with this, what seems to be the most possibly hideous mask known to man. That's only in the book. It's not in the movie, it's not in the TV show, but you get an idea that this Jekyll turning into Mr. Hyde just sounds awful, and it bears a reflection on Johnny Smith as a character. Though not everything in the book is as great as those few examples. There's a lot of not so great stuff in this book as well. Like everything that is required to set up Greg Stilson, for instance, his early scenes, they're inserted in such a ham-fisted way that it took me out of the narrative every single time, as did this one scene at the restaurant, which you're reading it, I'm like, this has absolutely nothing to do with the greater overall narrative as far as I can tell. So it's obviously going to play into something later on. There's no subtle foreshadowing about it whatsoever. Very much just kind of, we're going to get this in here because I need it for later on. It's not good. You know, Stephen King's definitely a master of the slow burn, and at this point, maybe he was just still working to develop all of his skills. I mean, by the time something more modern like 11/22/63 or the Mr. Mercedes trilogy, for, you know, just a couple of easy examples, there, you know, it's good. He works it really well, but for the Dead Zone, it just didn't quite land. It just did not work within the story. As the antagonist didn't work either. Greg Stilson, you don't really get shown that he's a bad guy. Sure, yes, he kicks a dog to death. And for that, the dude should just be drawn and quartered. Yeah, but for the most part, we're more told that he's a bad guy. It's never really so cut and dry that he is this awful person who deserves to be assassinated, which is the argument for this book. This is the crutch on which this book kind of lands. And it doesn't. It really doesn't. It's never so cut and dry as I would expect Stephen King feels that it should be, feels that it is. But you know, the adaptations, they kind of took care of that. There are two official adaptations of The Dead Zone. One I already really kind of mentioned. The other I've also mentioned a few times. The 2002 to 2007 TV series starring Anthony Michael Hall, developed by Michael and Sean Piller, and the earlier 1983 film starring Christopher Walken, directed by David Cronenberg, who's probably best known for the 1986 The Fly remake. The film is probably the most Christopher Walken I've ever seen Christopher Walken outside of Cowbell.
I got a fever, and the only prescription is more cowbell.
He plays Johnny with this soft-spoken bravado in Christopher Walken's kind of signature staccato language, and somehow he makes it perfectly natural to go from this sort of closeted, soft-spoken teacher reciting The Raven from memory to this wild-haired, borderline schizophrenic. Now, the show cast Anthony Michael Hall as Johnny. Yes, the Breakfast Club nerd, who matured surprisingly well. And I have to say, while his Johnny is a bit familiar if you watched the Christopher Walken version or if you read the book, there's something rather unique about it. His take is very much a bit different. He's funnier, he's quirkier, he's more ready to smile. He's somebody I'd want to hang out and have a beer with. I could have him on the couch right over here having some of this tequila, which is not something I would probably say for Walken's post-coma Johnny. He's a little too intense for me. And as I guess would be expected, in the TV show, the Greg Stilson plot is elongated. It's stretched out over the course of the entire series, which means we get far more build-up of Sean Patrick Flannery's take on the character than in the other versions, to very great effect. Now, the romance with Sarah, here played by Deep Space Nine's Nicole DeBoer, who I happen to like rather a lot. I mean, she was Dax. Dax was great. Loved Dax. That was handled rather differently here than in the movie or the TV show as well. But also, to great effect. I mean, it was played out over the course of 81 episodes. So, of course, it's going to be rather different. 81 episodes also means we get a lot of examples of Johnny's power, which is not conveyed how I pictured it while reading the book. This is not at all how I imagined. Even seeing the movie is not how I envisioned his kind of power to be manifested. In both versions, in the very first instance that he sees it, you realize that he can enter these memories, these flashes, these moments. He's literally put into it to the point that he can walk around in them. Which means that first time he happens with the girl caught in the fire, it looks like he's caught in the fire as well. Rather harrowing, actually, in a great WTF moment where he looks like he's going to get burned up. The show also gives us some great episodes and some great lines, even right there in the pilot. While, once Johnny comes out of the coma and he's trying to catch up, they're going over things that he missed. And one of them, and I don't know if I should even bring it up because I feel like he comes up way too often. He's going to come up a few more times after this, is he missed the OJ trial. And, bringing that up is as if I feel like I'm going to curse this thing. But, as Christopher Walken says, it's fine. It's fine. Meanwhile, the film, with only 2 hours or so to handle this whole plot, and it does cover pretty much the course of the book, it handles Greg Stilson, who is portrayed by Martin Sheen. I mean, it brings him to the fore almost immediately, introducing him far earlier, and goes so far as to actually show him purposely starting a nuclear war.
My destiny.
Now, this was teased in the TV show as well, and it was sort of hinted at within the book, but the book, let me see, how am I going to phrase? Showing the nuclear war as the movie did, as the TV show, I feel like it's sort of a disservice to Johnny as a character, to the basic plot of the book. Because going back to that Jekyll and Hyde sort of dichotomy there, Johnny Smith is... Reading it, I could not 100% believe him. Even though he's been proven right time after time again, there's still a doubt within me. Is he right? Is there another way? Does this have to happen? And in the end, Stephen King says no. It does not necessarily have to happen the way that Johnny thinks it needs to happen. Which I think is a great service to the character, to the plot, and whatnot. But going along with the assassination plot, it helps turn Johnny in the book, in the movie, into sort of the bad, especially in the book. I can't firmly believe in him. There's this doubt within me. And maybe that's just me. Maybe it's not everybody, but it was certainly there for me. Well, maybe it was just me. I've teased this part of the video a few times enough already that you probably know where I'm going with it. I asked straight up, would you kill Hitler if you knew what he was going to do before he did it? I mentioned the couple of presidents, and let's just start here. Late in the book, Johnny Smith asks a World War I veteran whose son died in World War II, was killed by Nazis. He asks him, just suppose you could hop into a time machine and go back to the year 1932 in Germany, and suppose you came across Hitler. Would you kill him or let him live? It's a page or two before the vet answers. And he answers only after he pulls and draws a pocket knife. He says, I'd seat this in his black, lying, murderer's heart. I'd put her in as far as she'd go, and then I'd twist her. But first, I'd coat the blade with rat poison. This answer, it plays a huge part in the finale of the book. It's the final push that helps Johnny decide that his plan is what is needed to happen. What he needs to do to prevent this full-scale nuclear war that he sees. He wrestles with the decision, though. And he wrestles with his ability to see this. He questions it. He questions God. There's actually a great passage within the book doing just that. If God wanted Greg Stilson dead, Why hadn't he sent him down the birth canal with the umbilical cord wrapped around his throat? Or strangled him on a piece of meat? Or electrocuted him while he was changing the radio station? Drowned him in the old swimming hole? Why did God have to have Johnny Smith to do his dirty work? But in the end, Johnny decides he has to take action. He has to stop Stillson. And in the final act of the book, in the final act of the movie, and I guess we would see this in the TV show as well, he attempts to assassinate Greg Stillson. And Greg Stillson defends himself with a baby, with a toddler. In the movie version, it's Sarah's son, and I think in the TV show it's also Sarah's son at one point or another, someone that they know. It's terrible. It's deplorable, and it all works to reveal this character's flaws in a way that an assassination never would. The whole point of the narrative is to say that violence is not the answer. Truth is the answer. A person's flaws, their horrible deeds, they'll reveal themselves. They'll come out, and we, the people, the good American people, will act accordingly. Well, that's the hope. And perhaps in 1978, when The Dead Zone was published, that was true. Perhaps back then, people did believe in the truth, did believe in an honest person, did believe in an honest politician, and said, if this person is going to do something so deplorable, they can't possibly represent me as a person. After all, this was only a few years, a decade or two removed from Nixon's betrayal of the country. So people were still a bit on edge. But I think in 2018, and maybe particularly in 2016, that is no longer the case. We can no longer hope for the American people to act accordingly. Now granted, there aren't any babies being used to stop bullets here. I mean, there's nothing as deplorable as that going on in politics right now. I mean, here's hoping. I mean, I don't know what's going to happen between filming this and posting this, but I don't see it actually happening. But is that the line? Is that the line of what we will allow our politicians to do? Is that what we define as the absolute most despicable thing that a politician can do? Is that the thing that would push us over the edge enough to say, hey, this candidate is a bad person? Even a populist one? Because calling on a foreign power to interfere with an election hasn't been enough.
Russia, if you're listening, I hope you're able to find the 30,000 emails that are missing.
Making fun of people with disabilities hasn't been enough.
I don't know what I said. I don't remember.
Admitting to sexual assault hasn't been enough.
Grab him by the pussy. I could do anything.
Buying a porn star's silence regarding an affair hasn't been enough. Hedging his bets with white supremacists hasn't been enough.
But you also had people that were very fine people on both sides.
Turning the media into a scapegoat hasn't been enough. Turning 911 into a mockery and denying the mass deaths of American citizens doesn't seem to be enough either. So would a baby shield be the straw that broke a camel's back? Even if it was recorded, even if it was live and aired on TV, I don't think it would. It would just be more fake news. It would just be more lies perpetrated by the media, the enemy of the people, so-called by the President of the United States of America this week. And frankly, if it did happen, that baby would probably get a book deal out of the whole thing, and that's just about it. As Stephen King suggested in The Dead Zone, violence is not the answer. It is never the answer. But we can also not currently hope on the American people to vote for someone with the proper moral background. If you're feeling the pinch from all sides, if your very livelihood is threatened, and someone comes along and promises to take those away and give you a hot dog while they're at it, you're probably going to take them up on it. These baskets of deplorables, as a politician once famously called them, they're suffering. And you have to help them. They need help. We have to help them. We have to help ourselves. We have to help everyone, because that's what we do as a species, as a race. And we're not going to survive without each other. We have to become a nation founded on truth, on love, on hope again. We've somehow lost that. And I don't want to go down this path that, frankly, it seems like Stephen King predicted. Let's end on a quote, shall we? This is from the very end of the story. We all do what we can, and it has to be good enough. And if it isn't good enough, it has to do. Nothing is ever lost, Sarah. Nothing that can't be found, especially hope. This has been the Drunk on Writing dissection of Stephen King's The Dead Zone. The next Stephen King book, Firestarter, which I've read already, and man, that's a good book. I look forward to talking about it. For now, if you enjoyed this episode of Drunk on Writing, please be sure to subscribe to the channel. Please be sure to hit that thumbs up button, leave a comment below, or hey, head on over to patreon.com/drunkonwriting or drunkonwriting.com and sign up. There's a lot of goodies I throw your way, and I look forward to hearing more from you. Until next time, cheers, and, keep on writing. And be sure to go vote.